Hello, everyone.
Hey there.
David. So I see everybody's here now, so we can start our meeting. This is the Accessibility Advisory Committee electronic meeting. The meeting is being held electronically in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001. And I'll call upon the Deputy Clerk to conduct a roll call of the committee present.
Please physically raise your hand when I call your name. Lorraine Blondin, John Gallagher, Kay Leslie, I see we have member Kay Leslie with us. I just don't see, oh, there she is.
There she is.
Diane Lupton, Councillor Dion Schumacher, Laurel Shaw sends her regrets, and Chair Councillor Dan Armour. Thank you.
We'll start off the moved by Lorraine Blondin and seconded by John Gallagher. It's recommended that the Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting agenda dated September 29th, 2020 be adopted and printed to circulate. All those in favor? Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none. So we're going to move right into section 4.1 accessibility issues. And we have a deputation today by Debbie Kerwin. Is Debbie with us? Debbie? Your mute's still on, Deb.
There we
There
go.
you go. Perfect.
Technology. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to see you back, John Gallagher. I had spoken to the Accessibility Committee when you first were set up to this term of office. And I had listed a number of items that were on the go at the time that I left and that I hope that you would carry on with. And I'm pretty pleased actually with the work that you've managed to do. But I've gone through the draft of the accessibility plan, and I've got some comments that I'd like to make for you to follow up with. But prior to that, there are two items. And you know, I know that we've had COVID interference and the time and the cost has delayed everything. So after watching council last night and seeing the progress they're being made and the money they're spending on issues, I figured, well, we better get in there. So let's get back on track. For the streetscape construction, just to keep in mind that what accessible features will be put in place during the construction to allow wheelchair access to businesses. And with the design of the sidewalks, will it retain, obviously, wheelchair access to the existing accessible stores and provide wheelchair access to the existing non-accessible establishments. So I hope that there will be some ongoing dialogue between the AC construction and the retailers themselves. Secondly, Dion's report from District of AAC. I'm hoping that she's going to talk about the proposed transit system that's going to bring rural riders into the main towns. And because the transit initiatives were put on hold at one point to wait and see what district was doing. So I'm hoping to see that that's finalized at district and that we can carry on with our own transit study. And the corridor bus, its contract was up last January, and district had put the criteria that it must be accessible. So it's not existing accessible. So I'd like to know if that has happened yet. And if not, that the AAC keeps their finger on that. Now, the last thing, and I'm going to be brief, I hope, barriers to be removed in the draft accessibility plan might be helpful if you've got that there in front of you, and you could switch to that section that you'll be able to follow the points that I wanted to make, and you might want to make some notes to yourself. I'm thrilled to see that the corporate signage policy is finally finalized, and that the Summit Center is going to proceed with the signage finally. I just wanted to note that Terry each year had set aside, I believe, $10,000 in her budget for accessibility issues. And I see that in the access to Canada Summit Center, which is 6.2B, number 1, those are the lever handles. And then we have signage in the viewing areas and signage to the Jack Beyond, which is long overdue. So I see now that staff is going to take a look at where the signage is required. I think one of the things that bothers me a little bit about any of it is recommended budget year to be addressed ongoing. I'm going to point that out again when we get to transit and give you a really good example of why that's, in my mind, not very acceptable. The site plan guidelines, I'm thrilled again to see that that's moving forward. The checklist has been developed. There's a draft form out there, and Curtis is to be coming to you today with a draft, so I'm thrilled about that. Accessible bus stops, and that's section 7.5. Mr. Hernan and I drove around town several months ago, and we went to every single bus stop, and we found that some were not accessible and some that were just not existent. They didn't match the route that the town had on their website. So, and I see that perhaps we could get an update from Steve on that and when that's going to take place. And just to point out that the AOTA says that a plan to fix the stops or to make your stops accessible must be in place by January 2013. So we've been waiting since 2013 for a definitive plan and date when these bus stops are going to be made accessible. So keep your finger on that. The transit study, as you know, was done, I think, 2 years ago. And as of yet, we haven't been able to get the ball rolling. And that's the point where, what is that, 7.5? Let me just see if I can find it. This is at 7.5. Sorry, guys, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Oh, here we are. The transit study. The transit study, as you've got it there, says that October 26, 2017, the Accessibility Advisory recommended to hire a consultant to complete a transit review study. But what is currently under council review and pending budget approval, is that referred to that council is reviewing whether or not to hire a consultant, or are they, what's under review there? It's a little vague. So I would edit that, take a look at that when you're discussing it. And of course, access to service hours of service. The transit study had a 5-year plan, and hours of service was only one aspect of the recommendations. So, you know, we've been dragging our heels since 2011 on transit, and transit hasn't changed really since 2006. Hunters Bay Trail. The Rotary Club of Huntsville is currently working on the trail voluntarily to bring it back to its glory. And they're incorporating accessibility requirements, especially for benches and so on. But way back when the Hunters Bay Trail was opened, I was there for the opening. I spoke to staff. I also spoke to the girl from Trans-Canada Trails. And on the other side of the train tracks or the highway is an area that's quite steep. And right now it's gravel. And in a wheelchair you slide. Well, at the time, we took a look at that. The girl from the trails and staff took a look at it, considering maybe we should pave it. And she said, oh, by all means, we have money for accessibility issues. Our mandate is to make the trail accessible. And so we proposed to staff to make that application to get that done. And as to date, there's nothing been done. But
Sorry, Deb, when was that done?
what? The trail?
To have that paved?
When?
Yes.
Well, we got it into the accessibility plan. And staff was to take a look at applying, and as to my date, to my mind, they haven't done it.
Okay.
But it would be great to do it at the same time that Rotary is doing their project. So I'd like to see that get off the ground. Lions Lookout in the accessibility plan. It says in the accessibility plan that staff and the accessibility committee would be going and taking a look. Well, I've already been there with staff, Steve Hernan and Colleen McDonald, and we went on site and took a look at it. But to my knowledge, no plans were made. Does that mean that they want to meet again? That's how it reads to me.
If we could look into that.
Look into that one. And taxi fares, which is not in the accessibility plan, was noted that both taxi companies were charging more than the regular taxi for someone in a wheelchair. And the AOTA says that it's the municipality's responsibility to make sure that the owners and operators of taxi cabs are prohibited from charging a higher fare or an additional fee for persons with disabilities. And I noted that, is Andrew coming? Is he on the agenda today?
Yes, he's here today actually to speak about taxi and taxi fares.
Yeah. Okay. So I'd be really interested in seeing what happens with that. So other than that, great job, guys. I'm happy. We're getting there, slow but sure, but there are some issues that are ongoing. And if you take a look, they've been ongoing for a long time. And I think it's time that we push the button on all of them. So
thank you very much, Deb, for bringing this to your attention. You're right, there's a lot of things right up there. And I know that the directors have been working on some of this stuff like streetscape and accessibility and transit reports, but unfortunately we sort of all fell behind the 8 ball since March. And
now I had sent a summary of all the items that I just finished speaking about to Crystal, and you might just use that as reference when you're going over it again.
We will for sure.
Okay.
I believe Crystal's forwarded that off to the appropriate people for some comments. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Deb. That was great.
All right. See ya.
Nice seeing you.
Okay.
Bye.
Crystal, delete me.
That's all right. Bye. I didn't know if anybody had any questions for her at all. We're going to move on to section 5, and 5.1 was streetscape update, and I see that Director Hernan hasn't joined the meeting yet. So we're going to move right on to 5.2 was the Ontario Building Code regulations, and Chris Nagy's here with us, I believe. Chris?
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today?
Great.
Excellent. So I believe the building code aspect was maybe a Q&A for that this committee wanted to bounce some questions off on me. Just to let you know, I was involved with the accessibility checklist because there were a fair amount of OBC related things within it. So I have incorporated kind of a backing presentation with Curtis to go over at that time. But if there are any direct OBC questions that anybody has, I'd be happy to to answer them at this point, or we can table them until we go over the actual checklist for this committee. So by all means, please fire away.
Are any committee members have any questions, Chris? John?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, just Chris, I'm working on a number of multiple projects. I want to make sure that we're clear on the amount of accessible units in these apartments or condominiums. Is there basically a number based on unit count that we have to look at?
Yeah, so through you, Chair Armour, there right under part 3.8, there is a requirement for residential occupancy C to be 15% of the units that are proposed.
15%, okay.
Yeah.
And that would be the full accessible with the full accessible bathroom and corridors leading from the entrance to the bedrooms and living areas and stuff.
That is correct. Yes, you're absolutely right. Now, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. However, one of the ways that we've drafted an accessibility checklist is noting, better measures. So I know from this committee, there was a suggestion on visibility aspects, right? So the building code is very specific on, yeah, you need 15 units to accommodate barrier-free design. However, there's still the visibility aspect again, where someone's coming to visit that location, and a suggestion on, hey, if you're at the design point, why don't you just make, a couple of the doors larger and make one of the washrooms within the unit accessible, right? So again, we'll go over that in detail when we get to the site plan guidelines. However, happy to chat about that for sure. So yeah.
I think I've seen Lorraine. Lorraine, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So some of my questions are probably going to be covered under the site plan review, but I think my comment on this is from doing the site plan reviews and having Debbie train me, was the site plan reviews are a specific piece of the what the grounds look like and where the building's kind of positioned, that kind of thing. But the inside stuff, which would be the Ontario Building Code stuff, didn't seem to be part of the mandate of the ACC. But with Debbie's input, from my reports, we added all the extra things that we thought were important for the future. As you said, if somebody's designing now, this is when to think about accessibility, not further along. And I guess I wanted to bring it to the committee as to, do we need to expand our mandate to say it's not just site plan reviews we're looking at, but we're also looking at, the inside of the building, and not just sidewalks and curbs, and we have to rely on the building department to make sure, of course, that it's going to meet all the codes, but there's many things that are not code, as you just mentioned, that site visibility stuff. It's not necessarily code, but it's our recommendation. So I wanted to propose that what we're doing is looking at more than just site plans. We're looking at, and I guess, Chris, you can tell me what the terminology is for the inside stuff and the stuff that happens later. And so that's one piece. And the other question I had, how do we as a committee know that that stuff gets done? So one of my frustrations with the the role of doing the site plan reviews is just feeling that it was going into a black hole. And there wasn't any feedback as to what are the developers actually looking at? Have they adopted any of our recommendations? Not just the stuff on the code, but the recommendations. So it was a little frustrating because it's a lot of work to review all this stuff to feel it's in a black hole. So this might be covered under site plan reviews later, but it's just a two-piece thing for me is our mandate big enough? And what happens with the work that we actually do? We want some feedback about it.
Yeah.
So that's it.
I'd be happy to answer that through you, Chair Armour. So I'm really eager for you guys to see the accessibility checklist that we kind of tailored for you guys to review. You know, again, I don't want to take away from the presentation that Curtis and myself have worked on. However, those items were definitely noted, and I do appreciate the comments, because even up to last year, the simple conversation on visual impair and you know, interior finishes as far as flooring and things really struck in that conversation, and I have been verbally explaining that to contractors, right? However, I think, you know, what potentially could be made out of this checklist is really a first stop and a first approach for contractors to have those recommendations, right? So yes, we did, you know, base the checklist on site requirements. However, we did keep the building requirements that were noted in there. We've just kind of arranged them as, you know, code and standard requirements, and then we're calling them best practices, so that, you know, when someone in the design stage is looking at that chart, they can more or less go, why wouldn't I incorporate that at this point, right? Like, there's a need in Huntsville, we understand it. So again, don't want to take away from that presentation. However, I think we're potentially in a better area than we were a year ago when you were reviewing the site plans, and we have, as staff, a better knowledge of things beyond the building code that we have instructed contractors to consider already. And I think some of them are being implemented. So, you know, I think we're already in an aspect as a win. However, you know, if we can hold off and wait for that presentation and go over it, and then happy to discuss some things further and also work with the committee to enhance that checklist if it makes sense. So, yeah.
Follow up, go ahead, Lorraine.
Thank you, Chris. So not everyone on the committee may be aware, but I had to step down from reviewing site plans because I have cancer. And it's just beyond my ability at this point to do it. And I think having the site plan checklist, which we started, is great, because it's hard to train a new person every time to keep and to bring. For me, I know it was a lot of learning, and it's a lot of, it's not my area of expertise. So, you know, I'm learning all this stuff as a volunteer, and so to keep changing people can be difficult. So I think it's really important that it's the department that is leading and making sure that everything gets completed. And we're just the recommendations and not necessarily doing so much of the work around the piece that I was doing. Just because I know it's time consuming and hard to find a volunteer, and there's a steep learning curve. So thank you, Chris. I look forward to the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. You've been doing a great job, just so you know. Does anybody else have any questions of Chris while we have him here? If not, I see that Director Hernan has joined us, so we're going to go back to 5.1 Streetscape, if everybody's all right with that. And Steve can give us a little bit of update on that. Thanks, Director.
Thanks, Chair Armour. So Council has approved the designs. Kent Park has just been pulled back for a little bit of redesign work right now. Also, at Council meeting last night, they approved a new pathway, fully accessible pathway between the Town Hall and the Trinity United Church. to lead from High Street, if you will, down to Main Street. And there's also another pathway going across on King Street. Right now where the 1-lane traffic is, that King Street will actually beside the old TD Bank is going to become a pathway. So both of them will provide fully accessible pathways from the rear parking areas up to Main Street. The one other thing that might interest your group more than anything is the crosswalk. And I can just share a screen if you want and just show you what's happening. I know it's a construction drawing, so it's tough to see, but
That'd be great.
share. So I apologize for these because they are difficult to read on a good day. Where my pointer is basically Town Hall, just to familiarize yourself. They got the accessible parking spots out front, the bus loading zone. Council is also having a proper crosswalk put in, fully ODOA compliant. So it will have the flashing lights, it will have the push buttons with it, the proper step down curbs. So if anybody wants to cross the street midpoint between Center Street and Brunel, there's now a midpoint crossway, if you will, right in front of the Town Hall. There was discussions at one time about 2 crosswalks, but they weren't feasible, being too close together. It didn't make any sense. So council went with the one up here at the corner of West Street and Main. So it'll be a fully accessible crosswalk. The other question that I received, somebody asked me, will all the stores now have accessible entrances? That's up to the building owners. So the construction project goes to building face. That's as far as our property goes. So some of the accesses will be improved. There's other ones down there which are 3 or 4 steps, and it just will not be improved on the town side. Nothing stopping the building owners from doing anything they want, but for us to go in and start redoing everybody's building, it would just take up way too much land and real estate, and we're on private property, so it didn't make sense. So from a streetscape point of view, everything that's being done is fully accessible. I know there was a question last night with the pathway. There was a question, had the accessibility committee reviewed the pathway that's being put in? I told council, no, they had not. We just gotten them, but the engineers that we have on the job have assured us that it's accessible. I might even have that drawing if you wanted to
bring that up, that'd be great.
Let me just find that one. Okay, I'll just share the screen again.
Absolutely.
So this is the pathway that council approved last night. As you know, up beside the town hall, there's a rampway here and a set of stairs about this area. And a few years ago, when we looked to see if we could get rid of the stairs and make it accessible, we didn't have the length of room we needed for the proper grade. Trinity United Church came forth this year and said, hey, if you're redoing Main Street, why don't you take advantage of the land between the 2 buildings and use that for your streetscape project as well. So when we seen that, we realized here's our opportunity to get an accessible ramp in. And that's why you've got the ramp. As you can see, it winds back and forth because we need the length to get the proper grades. It does have the landings. There's three landings built in at the proper spacing. So anybody with accessibility issues can stop and have a rest. And then when you come down on to where the Main Street is now, the ramp will then shoot you back up towards the crosswalk more. I think everybody knows the flower boxes which are in front of the town hall. So if you're coming up the accessible ramp and a mobility device, you can come up, you can turn, you can come all the way up to the back parking lot. There will be a handrail down the one side as requirements. There will be traffic lights, street lights put in for good lighting. So as you can see, this diagram shows 5 lights, and then it will have the boulders and some trees to make it look like a pretty walkway. And this is very similar to what they're doing with the Kent Park, King Street. I should have King Street right here too. That's the King Street, the TD Bank building right here. And right now it's a one-way street down. So that one-way street is being stopped and this is becoming a pathway. So this will have a nice slope, gradual grade to it, which will bring you right down to the River Mill Park. The bottom half of the road has to be maintained, so we have access into these private lots, and there's some parking in here, but there'll be no more cars driving up or down through this road on the main part. And the main part will just be a nice accessible path for all the pedestrians to use to bring up to a wider sidewalk. So everything else that we're doing on the Main Street and the reconstruction certainly is fully ODOA compliant. And other than the buildings, and we have no control over what the building property owners want to do with their properties. So I think you'll still see some of them temporary yellow ramps. Some of their properties are so wide with multiple doors entering them that there's just, it'd be impossible for them to bring the full thing into compliance, I believe, at this time. So, Councilor Armour, I'm happy to answer any questions or.
Does anybody from the committee have questions for Director and Councillor Schumacher? Go ahead.
So, Steve, you missed at the beginning. Deb Kerwin did a bit of an update, and she wanted us to make sure that we brought to the attention when the construction is happening for the streetscape. Is it going to be accessible during construction season for people in wheelchairs and for whatever accessibility reason for them to be able to still access stores through the construction zone? Because we know the sidewalks will still be viable.
So yes and no. How's that for an answer? The contract states that the contractor has to maintain access on the sidewalks at all times, but it recognizes there's going to be certain times where chunks of sidewalk are shut down. They can't pour new curbs and sidewalks in front of your business and still allow you to walk across it. So they're going to have to do some night work, some weekend work. We're talking with them on that once we have the final contractor picked, much like they did on King William Street with those businesses and with those driveways and whatnot. They might have to do half the sidewalk, wait till it hardens up, and then do the other half of the sidewalk. But it's their job to maintain access to the stores. Could somebody with mobility issues have to walk up a ramp? Yeah, that's a possibility, but it'll all be very minimal. The intent is that the contractor will work between the curbs for the majority of his job, and the sidewalk work is the minor part at the end when he rips them up and then does it. And what they've done on King William, and I'm sure they will on this one, is they always maintain one sidewalk in good shape while they work on one side, and then they flip over and do the other side.
Good. Lorraine, did I see you with your hand up? You're still muted, Lorraine. There you go.
Mike, thank you. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
My question had to do with what was in the original streetscape designs. This is going back a few months. There was concern among a few of us about the fact that they were planning to do bricks or granite on the different parking areas and different parts of the sidewalk. And I guess we had concern because a lot of those things make it difficult for someone who's visually impaired or using a walker, just because it's bumpy. What was the final decision on that? And I'm sorry, if I followed council lately, I might have known. Are you still planning to use that, or is it going to be all concrete and just regular paving?
So on the Main Street component itself and the majority of the sidewalks, it's regular concrete. There was talk at one time about doing the intersections all with interlocking brick and raising it up, things like that. That was all removed for what the reasons that you're describing and maintenance reasons. Now in the parks and on the pathways, they're proposing to use an interlocking stone. But what they actually do is they actually pour a sidewalk underneath it, a 4-inch sidewalk, and they lay the stone right on top of the sidewalk so it doesn't heave and move. So it prevents a trip hazard. So where they are going to use interlocking stone or brick, the intent is good ground compaction, good drainage, a sidewalk, a full sidewalk poured under it, and the stone put on top.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve. And I think I seen John had his hand up. Go ahead, John.
Thanks. Yeah, first, with regards to King William, I was really glad to see that sidewalk connection between the bridge and Wimpy's Diner there on the north side of King William. That's going to improve things dramatically along that section and make it safe for everyone. I applaud the town in closing down the King Street and turning that into pedestrian walkway, as well as the mid-block crosswalk. I don't know how many years people have been pushing for a safe access across Main Street in that location. Just a couple of points moving forward on the streetscape, and Lorraine sort of touched base on it with regards to the surface, but I'm thinking more along the lines of street furniture placement and ensuring that with perhaps the redesign of the Kent Park, that there might be some accessible, picnic tables or, seating or, along those lines. But placement of the seating could really affect sort of mobility along the sidewalk. So has there been specific plans, or is it just one of these things they're going to wait till it's done and then just put everything where they feel like it? Thanks.
So there is plans, John. They call them Muskoka moments. And that's where you see 2 Muskoka chairs, some granite rocks, some trees and things like that. They're all designed out of the travel path though. So we've got extra wide sidewalks because they're taking those huge concrete planters out. So in front of the IDA grocery store pharmacist, for an example, that big concrete planter is, excuse me, is slated to come out. There'll be trees planted down at street level. In between the trees, you can see a couple of Muskoka chairs in there, some boulders and some landscaping, all well out of the way of the regular travel path. So if somebody wants to sit down, you're sitting off to the side. You're not sitting in the way, the benches and in the way of the travel path.
Great. Thanks.
Councillor Schumacher, I see your hand up.
Yes, again. So yes, and thanks, Steve, for bringing forward the design on the ramp next to the town hall. I know Laurel's not here, and I know she'll be very happy to know about the handrail, because that has been one of her biggest things that she would like to see. So I'm glad that that is continuing on through. Now, you did mention, again, when we talked about the Muskoka moment that John had brought up, that at those landing abilities, there would be maybe some of those, but again, they'll be off to the side and out of the way as well.
That is correct. So the clear path of travel will always be maintained, and not just for mobility issues. I'm a little selfish, but it's for maintenance issues. So the sidewalk machines can get up and down, and there's a good clear path for them. So your Muskoka moments are always going to be off to the side. Your garbage cans will be off to the side, not tucked out of the way, but in their own space, basically between the trees. And there'll be, I think there's 48 trees planned for the main street. So they'll be in between the trees, which is right at the curb lane.
Follow-up?
Just follow up. So that, now that I'm looking at it, will that rail have like a block in between at the landing area, or is it continuous?
Let me just find that drawing again. You're wondering whether or not you'll be able to. There must be a way you can step into the to the landing.
Yeah. And then I'm wondering if somebody is using it to guide and use the rail, and then all of a sudden it disappears for a piece of landing, and then they have to try to find it again.
I believe on the picture, it looks like it runs continuous. But
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just blowing this up.
Yeah.
So what you can see when you come off Main Street, you can see there's a railing on 2 sides to begin with. So there'll be a railing right across so nobody steps off, because there's a bit of a drop here, about a 2-foot drop, I think it is. Then when you're coming up the ramp on the right-hand side, there'll be a railing. You've got a landing here, which is a flat zone. You're coming up, it's a continuous railing. The Muskoka moment is on the opposite side. And then as you continue up, I'm seeing a continuous railing. A continuous railing, even though they've got a planting moment, I guess, if you will, on the right-hand side, but it looks like a continuous railing. And I would have to dive into the specs to read on it, but I'm not seeing anything where I'm seeing any breaks, so it would be a continuous railing. So if somebody was using that as a handrail, they'd be able to use it the whole way down. Just like what was done on King William Street, like John pointed out, in front of 106 King William, that new piece of sidewalk we put in, we had to put a handrail there as well to keep the pedestrians and the cars in the parking lot separate. Very similar design as that.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve.
I don't know if I got a picture of the railing. There it is. That just shows you the railing, what it's like, how it's anchored into the ground. It's a galvanized pipe railing, and it's showing it as a continuous railing.
Thanks for sharing that, Steve.
No problem.
Does anybody else have any questions of Director Hernan right now? Lorraine, go ahead. Oh, you're muted again.
I know.
There you go.
It takes me a moment.
Yes, okay.
My head doesn't work the same as it used to. I just want to comment how impressed I am with those two walkways. What a difference from the last time I attended a presentation on this. I'm really impressed, both from an accessible point of view and from just aesthetically. I think both will be a huge advantage to the town, but from an accessible point of view, I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Excellent. Not seeing any more questions. Thanks again, Director Hernan, for coming and joining us. We know you're late, but always a great presentation. We all enjoy it.
Thank you. And I appreciate it. And I wish your committee all the best, but I'm going to carry on with my day.
All right. So we're going to move on to section 6, reports, and going to go back to the site plan list, 6.1, and Curtis is with us.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Chair Armour, members of committee, and any members of the public here watching online. Firstly, I'd just like to thank the committee for giving us, and sorry, I should have mentioned that Mr. Nagy will be joining me in this presentation. And just like to thank you again for giving us an opportunity to review and comment on the committee's accessibility checklist. Just given some of the comments during the building Q&A, I just want to start maybe by addressing site plan control and its role in the development process and how that then relates to the accessibility checklist. So, site plan control is a form of development control under the Planning Act. Site plan control essentially allows us to review detailed designs of a property to ensure that the town's requirements and other agency standards and requirements are met. The Planning Act lays out very clearly the information that municipalities can address through site plan control. And that includes things like building placement, parking, exterior pathways, lighting, stormwater management, exterior access to a building, landscaping, and accessible design pertaining to the items I just mentioned. The Act is very specific that the interior design of a building is exempt from site plan control. So as it pertains to this committee, major residential, commercial, and industrial site plans are forwarded to the AAC for comment. For that reason, it is important to really understand what elements of the project can be influenced through the site plan control process. The accessibility checklist, I was thrilled to hear about the idea. It's a nice creative solution to ensure that developers are provided with a clear and concise list of accessible design requirements, as well as requirements and best practices to implement while they are applying for a building permit. And I think really, just to maybe address Lorraine's comment more, on the nose, the AAC has always provided us great comments that we can then turn around and implement on the site plan. Locations of accessible parking spaces, things like that. And it was always very helpful feedback, things that we potentially didn't consider this committee would point out, and we'd obviously get that implemented. But the committee's always gone above and beyond and provided best practice recommendations to developers through the site plan commenting process, and those comments were always forwarded to the builder, but it's just not. They were never comments that we could actually address through the site plan itself. It was more like an FYI, making the developer aware. So I can understand from Lorraine, your perspective, the work that you would put into that, the many hours reviewing plans and looking at it, giving detailed feedback to a developer, and then having nothing necessarily come from that because it was sort of dealt with under the building permit and not necessarily through site plan. But I suspect that your comments were never wasted. If nothing else, they would make a developer aware of best practices and things to consider. So just to get back on topic though, to date, staff in the building department, the building and planning departments have reviewed the accessibility checklist and made a number of changes. So I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Nagy to discuss the work that's occurred today.
Thanks, Curtis.
Thank you very much, Curtis. Just wanted to make sure that everybody can see the initial site plan accessibility checklist on their screen. So this was the checklist that I believe was made by committee and submitted to staff to review and potentially make comment on. There was a lot of good content within it, a lot of relatable directly to me with building code requirements, zoning bylaw, things like that. There were also some really good context about guidelines or things that exceed the general standards that staff can enforce or request. So what we did was we actually, and please again, can you see the Word document that's labeled Town of Huntsville Accessibility Checklist? So this was the checklist that we've kind of developed with your content. And, you know, I have circulated it to Crystal to have committee actually review and make changes. Like this is, in my mind, a living document until all parties are happy and we can go from there. But really, it begins with kind of the segue on why we have the accessibility checklist. It does give the exemptions out of the building code, just so you know we're upfront on what things do not require accessibility. However, there is some contents noting that we suggest that all applications consider barrier-free and accessibility. Project classification. So under the previous checklist that was submitted, there was kind of some lines up in the top corner. What this would allow to happen when you're reviewing this as a committee is actually streamline the things that in my mind are important as far as occupancy classification. You know, if it's a restaurant as opposed to a multi-res, obviously there would be some differences that committee would be looking at. Number of stories, that kind of leads into, you know, if it's a 5-story residential building, obviously immediately you think it needs to have an elevator in it and things like that. So kind of, you know, get you thinking about those type of areas, right? So this is where we really took your content and tried to highlight, you know, the suggestions from a committee standpoint on best practices, or in the previous document, they were labeled as guidelines, right? So if we look to the left of this, so this is the standard requirements are actual building code or zoning bylaw. These are the requirements that you absolutely need to do if your project relates to it. So the yes, no, not applicable, again, carried it over from your checklist. Very good. But this third category is really, I think, where a committee, in my opinion, was aiming for. And this is the best practices. So these are the things that are above and beyond, you know, building code related aspects and planning aspects, but are really, you know, if a contractor or designer is getting this checklist ahead of the actual design or at the site plan stage, they can really start thinking about this, right? So accessibility within 30 meters of the entrance. That was a guideline piece that was on there, but it would be best practice, I think, from this committee. And really what it's trying to do is kind of go, you know, rather than on every application receiving, hey, move the accessible parking within 30 meters of the entrance, right away it's saying, hey, this is best practice. If you can do it, right? So I think, you know, again, really want to get your feedback on it and you guys add more contents and everything, but basically, so we broke it down: designation of accessible parking, your barrier-free walkway requirements, curb ramp requirements. Again, related back to what are code and zoning bylaw requirements and what are better practices, right? So now further after kind of the site plan entity, we've still kept in the building design entity, which Lorraine spoke exactly to what you had suggested. And I think this is really where you guys can showcase, you know, potentially things that you've seen out in the field, you know, visiting buildings within Huntsville that maybe requirements haven't been directly achieved. So what we labeled it at the beginning is, you know, we understand that there's a building code requirements and that sets out all the standards and everything like that. However, visiting buildings, we want to make sure that you're definitely including the following. So again, building code requirements, so accessible washrooms, you know, the dimensions and everything meeting OBC, but then on best practices, you know, incorporating the adult size change room table. If, you know, it's a question of a commercial entity where right behind it, there's a huge storage room that's larger than the actual mechanical that's in it, why not just increase that washroom size to include that adult change table, right? So we're trying to really make it so that this document gets the designers and contractors thinking ahead of time and maybe consider those improvements. So happy to, you know, take any comment. I know that you haven't physically had this document in hand, but I'm expecting probably at your next committee, you'll probably circulate it, or even if you get it ahead of time and you want to provide us with any comment ahead, more than happy to answer. One other highlight that I would like to note is I know in the previous one, there was the context that were copied out of the zoning bylaw and the building code as far as number of parking spaces and parking size and everything. We changed the reference to actually change it to as per zoning bylaw or as per building code. And the reason behind that is administratively, if for whatever reason the building code changes or the zoning bylaw changes, you know, it may be behind the 8 ball because this would need to be updated as well, right? So by referencing back to the appropriate act or bylaw, then everything is automatically updated. So I hope committee can understand that, and we're, you know, happy to answer anything. I know Curtis had some closing remarks on that, so I'll let him continue on and then answer any questions at the end. Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. In regards to implementation, which is sort of the next important bit, planning staff recently began working to update the 2008 zoning bylaw with the new community planning permit bylaw. The community planning permit bylaw, or CPP, basically amalgamates the zoning bylaw, minor variance and site plan approval process, which is all intended to streamline the development approval process. Documents such as site plan guidelines will be replaced with new resources that will incorporate accessible principles. And given that all these changes are sort of happening, really what I wanted to do was just reiterate to this committee that you know, we are more than happy to continue to work with you, continue discussions, and make sure that we incorporate these materials into a new community planning permit manual, including these guidelines. So I know that there'll be more consultation with this committee in the future from the staff members working on the CPP bylaw. So yeah, just wanted to make sure that you were all aware that that will be happening and happening in short order. So yeah, any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, guys. That I was impressed with that. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Is there anybody in the committee like a question? John, go ahead.
Thanks. It relates back to my first question with Chris, and it's not something that I don't think you can deal with it right now, but I just asked you to keep in mind when you are updating for the development permit. I'm looking at the table for the amount of accessible parking required, and as Chris had mentioned, it's a ratio of having 15% of the units in accessible design within the building. However, say for example, on a building of 20 units, rentals, you only need one accessible parking spot, but you need 3 accessible units within the building. So if we can maybe just have a look the next time, you put it in the housekeeping or whatever on the accessible designated parking spot, and just look at the table, and it might not be a total 15% because some people, with the disabilities may not park in those spots. But I think it's kind of low right now in the zoning bylaw. And so that would be my only comment. I think the checklist is good. Curtis, maybe just add on to, from personal experience, Curtis and the staff in the planning department are also requiring pre-consultation meetings with people that are looking to develop multiple residential, commercial, industrial sites. And that would be a good opportunity to educate them on that type of process. So I think you've done a great job with getting that checklist together, and just have an eye open for any updates to the bylaw with respect to handicap parking spots. Thank you.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, just to respond to John. Thank you for the feedback, John. I definitely will note it and relate it to the manager and director to potentially include as a housekeeping amendment. But I also just really wanted to relay that the CPP update is it's being fast tracked. They are hoping that it will be early to mid next year that we'll have this sort of bylaw at least in a place that we could potentially approve it. And that said, this committee will absolutely be part of that. They'll be part of the consultation process. So I will absolutely relay that information today, but just a note to all members that it'd be good to note those things, and obviously we'll be considering them too. And through that consultation process, just pointing out sort of those types of things that need a second look and that can be improved would be incredibly helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Curtis. Lorraine, I think I seen your hand up. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say, Curtis and Chris, how appreciative I am that this got developed into something from content I gave you. It looks great. I think it'll be really useful and make it a lot easier even for, not just for the developers, but for the committee when they're reviewing anything. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions for Curtis or Chris while we have them here? Okay, go ahead, Kay.
Alert, audio now unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely, we can.
Thank you. I was just wondering, and excuse me, I couldn't see the actual chart, of course, but so I may be redundant, but I wondered if there has been much attention given to the fact that some individuals with disabilities may need a parking space for like a support worker or a CCC worker or physiotherapist, whatever. Has that been taken into account?
I'd like to take that on.
So I'd be happy to address that through you, Chair Armour. So Kay, the content that's actually in the checklist today is strictly the content that was provided to us. However, I think through further discussions, that would definitely be something to potentially put into the best practice section of the charts. Again, through, as Curtis suggested, we are going through a new planning process, and I think it's a very understood need, to have parking for your support aspect. So I think it is definitely something that could lead to further discussions and possible support through the CPP program, or at the very least through this checklist as a best practice item at this point, and potentially something further in the future. Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris? Anything to add, Curtis? That's good. That's good.
No, that through you, Mr. Chair. No, I think Chris summarized it wonderfully. Yeah.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any questions for these two? Not seeing any. Thanks, guys, very much.
Oh,
Really appreciate
Not really
it.
a question,
Oh,
Chair Armour, but a comment. Since we were talking about parking, I do want to update sort of and it may be more parks related, but it is parking, is that in up in my ward in our area, it came forward through some constituents at the Port Sydney Beach that there was no accessible parking. So we did some work with Director Hernan and the Parks Department, and probably some work with you guys in bylaw and whatnot, to create 2 parking spaces in the upper parking lot and 1 in the lower parking lot at the Port Sydney Beach, to create that opportunity to have accessible parking in a spot that obviously had been neglected at that time. So that was a good comment, and a way for the community itself to sort of be able to, you know, put that process forward and get that accomplished.
yeah. Thank you very much for that. That's good. Good to hear. All right, not seeing any more questions. Thanks, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. Great checklist. I'm sure we'll see that sent through to us and we can all have a really good look at it on our spare time at home. Crystal?
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. Have a great day.
That'd be
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks, guys. So we're going to move on to 6.2 of our agenda. That's report number corporation 2020-36, 2018, 2022 accessibility plan, and the 2020 update. And then Crystal's going to bring that to us. Crystal?
Thank you, Chair Armour. So I just thought I would highlight a few things within the accessibility plan, some changes that were identified. The first thing I will note is the numbers. So we did have quite a few sections that were moved around and changed. So I know some of the numbers are off, but don't worry, they will be fixed for the final version. I wanted to note in particular the online accessibility requirements section. So that was a section that we had actually included last year. And that was due to the regulations for 2021, so January 1st, 2021, that we need to have online accessible programs, as well as our website. So everything online needs to be accessible. So that was kind of our response and a bit of a plan on how we were going to address that. The reason that we're looking to remove this now is that we do have a policy in the works that will be coming through this committee. So it will come through before the January 2021 deadline. So I know it's a little bit cart before the horse, but that is why we're proposing to remove it out of the plan, just because it's a little bit redundant in that we will have a more comprehensive policy coming forward to address that. The other thing that I did want to note was the creation of a corporate barrier section. So we had divided up all of the sections into our various divisions throughout the corporation. We did create a new section, which was corporate barriers, just because we felt this had to do corporate wide. So this is for sections or for items that have to do not just with one department, but that have implications corporate wide. So that's why we created that. Just a couple things to note throughout the document as well. There were some items brought up earlier in the meeting by Deb Kerwin, as well as in our previous presentation. So site plan guidelines. It did note in the plan that we were looking at removing some of the sections and removing it because of the CPP that's coming forward. However, I think we'll be looking at kind of changing some of the wording because I think we do want this checklist coming forward. So my recommendation actually at this time would be, if committee feels appropriate, would be to postpone this. I'd love to take all of your comments now and then bring this forward at the next committee meeting to incorporate any of the comments and changes from the presentations earlier today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Crystal at all? Not seeing any. I do have a motion that comes along with this. So it's moved by Kay Leslie and seconded by Diane Lupton It is recommended that committee approve the 2020 update to the 2018-2022 Town of Huntsville Accessibility Plan and the Accessibility Accomplishment Date attached to Schedule A and B to Report Corporation 2020-36. So all those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you. So we're going to move on to previous business. And under 7.1, that's Center Street Crossing. And that was Lorraine that had brought that forward. Lorraine?
This, it's really Kay's issue. I brought it, I wanted to make sure it was on the agenda. So, because it was Kay who had brought it forward initially. So maybe if Kay's okay, if she can speak to it. We want to ensure that the letter that was sent by Kay's, I can't remember exactly her position, but she assessed and she wrote an official letter to this committee, and we wanted to ensure that there was follow-up on it, that it didn't just get discussed. So I'm going to pass it to Kay because she'll better explain it.
Okay, thank you so much, Lorraine. Chairman, I just wanted to mention that I guess when I raised this issue, it was not only for me as a visually impaired resident and pedestrian in the area of the Devon Lee developments and Chartwell and so on, but I feel pretty strongly that we are increasing our numbers of seniors in this area exponentially. There are 20 new townhouses going in as I speak. Anyway, I feel pretty strongly that it is, as I mentioned before, impossible and extremely dangerous to try and cross Center Street from Legacy Lane in order to get to like Home Depot or any of the places on the other side. So the mobility instructor, Jennifer, who came with me to do a site visit and so on, did indicate that, you know, you could walk down to, if you could walk that far, to the four-way crossing at Haynes Road. However, that also is not very safe and there are no sidewalks. So trying to walk back, you know, on the other side of the road would be pretty much impossible also. So I was hopeful that perhaps there might be some way to, you know, to make this crossing possible for the future. And I know that I ran into our mayor briefly just on the street, and I did say, you know, I hope that a roundabout was not being considered, because that would be really challenging for a pedestrian. Anyway, I'll leave it with you and see if there has been any additional information or interest in putting in some kind of accessible crossing opportunity. Thank you.
I wish Director Herndon was here to speak to this right now. He'd have a lot more information than I have. I know it has been discussed a couple of times at council about how dangerous that crossing is, not only for people walking, but also for people driving with that access. So I guess I'm gonna have to follow up with that with you, Kay. I'll check with Director Herndon and see where that is right now. I don't know if Councillor Schumacher has any more information on that or not.
No, I mean, pretty much what you were saying. I think some of the difficulty is because of the way that you are situated in the hill. And I think there's a bit of like the pull out. So it's almost like you're crossing like 4 lanes of road to some extent, right? At that particular spot. I think there was some issues with trying to create a crosswalk right in the middle of the hill. So again, it was looking at what is the opportunity up at the four-way stop to be able to do something. But I get your point, Kay, is that not everybody can walk either up to the four-way stop or down the hill to where there is the crosswalk at, is it Holland Drive and Center there at the corner where the Wendy's is. There is a crosswalk ability there, but I get that. Again, I guess like our dilemma with the main street was the crosswalks were at either end of the main street and a lot of people were crossing in the middle. So that's why we did propose and try to get the crosswalk in the middle of Main Street. And I see that the dilemma to some extent is the same thing there, is that people are crossing in that middle section where Legacy Lane is and not maybe necessarily having the ability to go to either end where they've sort of had designed the ability to cross.
Mhm. If I could just add,
Yeah, go ahead.
walking, if you were trying to walk north to Howland Drive toward down the hill toward the Independent, there is a pretty treacherous path that is all potholes and broken up. But also when you get to that crossing, which I tried to use with my mobility instructor also, there's an on-ramp that is constant cars turning right. And so by the time the light changes, you haven't made any headway because people just constantly turn like a highway ramp, off to the right. So I have not been successful at crossing there either. So it's not really an option unless it gets redesigned or something at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Just to add to the Center Street area there, I know that one of the concerns was they talked about putting a crosswalk there with a stoplight. But in the winter months, people coming up the hill, it would be difficult if that road's not maintained properly with vehicles getting stuck afterwards. So I know that was one of the comments made when they were reviewing that. I think I seen Lorraine's hand up. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Do we need to ensure that this stays as an agenda item? Do we need to make any sort of motion to say the committee would like an accessibility review and action for Center Street at this area? Maybe not just Legacy Lane crossing, but the sidewalks along that area or lack of them, the intersection issue that Kay talked about further down where she couldn't cross because there was everybody turning all the time. I don't want it lost again. So do we need to make any sort of formal motion, or can we keep this as ongoing business that we want to continue to review? Maybe Crystal can tell us what we need to do.
Well, we could put a motion forward that we direct staff to do a study of that area or an investigation of that area on better access for people with disabilities and improving the area. I don't know if we've got any appetite for that at the committee here.
Yeah, through you, Chair Armour, I would say that sort of a combination of what is the traffic flow and what is the accessibility and pedestrian flow, and sort of see how, I think that's the key issue there, is how the two mesh together and what we can do to make it viable for both.
I think Crystal put her hand up there.
Thank you, Chair Armour. So I believe one of the, or when we had Director Hernan at one of the meetings, because Center Street is a district road, I know that was part of it too. So it's working with district and with town staff. So if you're looking at putting a motion on the floor, it might be for staff to work, for town of Huntsville staff to work with district staff to report back with potential options on a crosswalk at Center Street and Legacy Lane or a surrounding area.
Okay. How's the committee feel about that? Go ahead, John.
Are you sure that Center Street is a district road? I thought it was a town road.
Yeah, I think it might be town also, but
I can confirm that with Director Hernan.
Yeah, I would just check that, because I know West or Chaffee is a district road, Ravenscliff, but I'm pretty sure the town expropriated that land and built the road there.
Yeah, I think you're correct. Go ahead, Crystal.
I have drafted a motion, if I could pull it up on the screen and see if you might be okay with it.
Sure, that'd be great.
Alert, Crystal Parashe has started screen share. Alert, VLRV.
So just to read this, basically it's recommended that committee recommend that town staff review a potential crosswalk at Center Street and Legacy Lane or surrounding areas. Does that sound good for the committee?
Yes,
To have a first and a seconder for that?
I would,
Kate,
yes,
Okay.
yes.
seconder, Lorraine? Excellent.
Yeah.
All those in favor? That motion carried.
I apologize here, it's not letting me stop share screen.
Still there.
It's not letting me stop.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So with that, while Crystal's trying to figure out this share the screen, do you want to move on to section 8, which is new business? And under that is 8.1, it's site plan reviews. As we all know, Lorraine has been our go-to person for this and has been the last couple of years, but recently, due to unexpected circumstances, she hasn't been able to. So I'm just wondering if there's anybody in the committee who would be interested in taking on that task. Seeing none, I don't see any hands, so. I guess it's something I could do. Is that correct, Crystal?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So I could put my name on there for now until Lorraine's back onto her feet and ready to jump into that again. So I have a motion here that it's moved by Dion Schumacher and seconded by Lorraine Blondin, that the committee recommends that the AACS 19 to remove Lorraine Blondin and insert Dan Armour in its place. All those in favor? Excellent, that motion is carried. So under new business on 8.2, accessible taxi pricing. Andrew's in attendance to speak to this. Are you still there, Andrew?
I am, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
There you go. Well done. So Andrew, anytime you want to go.
Okay, so under the IASR, which is regulation under AOTA, section, sorry, I have it here, 80, it's a municipality's responsibility to ensure that taxi companies who have an accessible taxi for a person with a disability not charge any more for the same fare, for the same trip distance, if you will, than a person without a disability. Back the end of February, Debbie Kerwin brought to the town's attention that one of the companies may have been charging more than they should have been. I contacted both companies, made it very clear with both of them that this was not allowed. The one company at the time, their accessible taxi, which wasn't really accessible, wasn't actually operating. And the other company, I had quite the discussion with the owner over the regulations, over the law, and what he can and cannot do. I think it was about 20 to 25 minutes he finally understood. And from what I understand, the practice of charging more was discontinued at that point. Again, the IASR regulation under AOTA is very clear as to what it is that a taxi company can and cannot do.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Andrew. Does anybody have any questions of Andrew? Diane, go ahead.
I don't really have a question. It's more just like a comment, because we at Community Living Huntsville deal with both taxi companies quite frequently. It is one of the highest used modes of transportation for people we support. Both taxi companies have moved forward to not having an accessible vehicle. So therefore, they just don't provide transportation to anybody who uses a wheelchair or needs that service, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Thanks for that, Diane. Lorraine, did I see you have your hand up?
When Debbie and I discussed this, which would have been like way back in February, one of the questions was, is there going to be a specific bylaw that says they have to follow AOTA around this, or is it enough to just have AOTA?
Through you, Chair Armour. So Debbie and I did briefly discuss adding something to a bylaw. Now, the taxi bylaw and redoing it has been on our radar for a couple of years now. We are in the process of reviewing several town bylaws. Just most recently, council last night passed a new discharge of firearms bylaw. When it comes to the bylaw and enforcement for something like this, it could be done. It is, like I said, it is already in the IASR, but unfortunately, there's no fine associated to it. There's no ticket to give. So that would be something we'd have to look at in the new bylaw for the purpose of enforcing and ensuring that the rates are the same for everyone. So it could be done, to answer your question.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I guess the hardest part for that would be able to enforce the bylaw afterwards, because it'd be on a hearsay type of thing, right?
Correct, Chair Armour. What we would do is, if we received a complaint, we would ask for it to be in writing or an email, something in print that we could have to go off of. And the reason we do that is we weren't there to witness it. We weren't there to see it. So we have to go by the complainant's kind of like a testimony, if you will.
Right.
Based on what they say, is the determining factor as to whether or not we lay charges. Was there actually an offense? Is there a charge that could be laid? And would it stand up in court if the person were to decide to fight that charge?
Right. Did you have a question, John? Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yes, just with regards to the taxis, every year they have to obtain a license. Is there something in the mechanism of granting a license that can, perhaps force them into, providing a cab for, accessible?
Through you, Chair Armour, there could be. What I've done in the past was I've actually offered both cab companies here in Huntsville a free license, so it wouldn't cost them to register an accessible taxi. One company did take advantage of that a few years ago, but as the member of the committee there, Diane Lupton said, that neither cab company currently has an accessible taxi.
Right. And I guess it's not legislated by the government that taxi companies have to provide that service, being private business.
I don't believe so, Chair Armour. I don't think there's any requirement that says they need to.
Okay.
Lorraine? No, sorry.
Oh, sorry, John.
No, let the rain go and then I'll ask my question.
Okay.
Again, sort of like the Legacy Lane crossing, I want to ensure that this isn't lost. So do we need a motion from us to say we would like, sorry, my brain gets a little confused, to have something in writing, whether it's a bylaw amendment or whatever, Crystal can figure this out, a bylaw amendment to ensure that they comply around pricing. And then a second piece, I would like to suggest that we ask town staff to work with the taxi companies to find incentives to encourage them to have an accessible taxi. If we can't force them by other ways, can town staff work to have incentives? And Andrew's already mentioned one, that they, didn't have to pay for a certain license. But if I just don't want this lost, because I think this is a huge thing, that there's no accessible taxi in town, and that they were charging a different price until Andrew had this long conversation with them. So I think there needs to be something somewhere that says you can't do this and this is the consequence. That's it.
Can I
Yes,
ask
John.
with the licensing, do the cab companies have multiple licenses for taxis? Or is it just one license for X amount of vehicles?
Through you, Chair Armour. So the way it works is there's a broker. A broker is the owner of the company that provides the dispatch services. And then there's the owner, who's the owner of the vehicles. And luckily now, in both cases, the broker is the owner. They own all the vehicles. And then come the vehicles, all the vehicles are licensed separately. There's not one big license for everything. Each vehicle has its own license, if you will. Each vehicle has to go through a vetting process to obtain a license as well.
And so given that train of thought, the broker is the one at the end of the day who's benefiting the most from the license by having cab drivers working for them. Is there not something in the license that can be modified to basically allow them, you're allowed 2 cabs with, no accessibility, but if you go for a third one, you're going to have to provide a cab that's accessible and charge the same rates as you would otherwise. Because I understand those cab licenses can be quite lucrative.
If I could, I'll try to answer that through you, Chair Armour. I'm not really sure of the answer because it's under the Municipal Act that gives it the authority to license taxis. And it's very thin, if you will, as to what it says, as to the municipality's authority or ability to license. It actually gives us the ability, but we don't necessarily have to. Putting some sort of restriction or a condition, maybe is a better word, a condition on a license, where every 2 non-accessible you have to have, or 2 or 3 you have to have 1 accessible. I'd have to go back and look it up and see if there's something that could be done to that extent. Because right now I'm not 100% sure.
I see Kay's got her hand waving up in the corner. Go ahead, Kay. You're still muted though.
Alert, audio now unmuted.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to make a quick comment, if I could, in terms of accessible taxis. I am truly shocked to hear that there is not one wheelchair accessible taxi in Huntsville of the 2 companies. And I personally would be very willing to offer to do any research or provide information into the process of encouraging that. My experience with a guide dog has been mostly in Toronto, where on a regular basis, we would be refused access to a car for many reasons. But in that case, or a cab driver wanted to charge extra because you had a guide dog. So in that case, we would go to the licensing commission and file a complaint. And then, a few times I ended up going to court, et cetera. But here, I have been totally impressed with how willing cabs are to accept a guide dog in the car. And as I say, I had no idea that this was not the case for wheelchair users. So if there's anything I can do in terms of looking into this further, I would be very happy to do that also.
Thanks for that, Kay. I'm just wondering, do we actually need this in a motion, or do you think Andrew just giving you some direction that maybe looking into the municipal act and the licensing fee that John spoke about with the extra cabs coming in, that you can maybe bring a report back to us on what our options are, or if we have any options at all? Go ahead, Crystal.
Sorry, just a recommendation, if committee's wanting to see something back and we're giving direction to use staff time, I would recommend a motion be passed. And I do have one drafted if you would like to see it.
That would be fabulous. Thank you very much.
I'm going to try sharing my screen again. Let's see if I fixed what happened last time.
Alert, Crystal Parashe has started screen share.
Oh, as everybody can see that, I hope. It is recommended that staff be directed to investigate and bring back a report to the next Accessibility Advisory Committee to include a potential taxi bylaw amended to address accessibility requirements. 2, the ability of the municipality to require accessible taxis. And 3, potential incentives for taxi companies to operate accessible vehicles. How's that sound, everybody?
Good.
Good. Do I have someone who'd like to first that? John, seconder? We see Kay. All right. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thanks very much. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank
We
you,
look
Mr.
forward to
Chair.
hearing back from you in the next few months.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Crystal Parashe has stopped screen share. Host attendee dash Zoom dash.
Very good to see how productive we are. We get some motions going in there. We're going to move on to 8.3 of our agenda, and that's a community member compensation. And Lorraine has brought this forward. If she's able to speak to it right now, that'd be great. Oh. She left us. There she is.
Sorry, I have to speak very quickly. My oncologist just called and she called half an hour early, so she's calling me back in 5 minutes. So I'll speak as fast as I can on this subject. So what's come to mind for me is that individuals who would serve on this committee are often individuals with disabilities who have often the least income of anyone. And it's becoming really apparent to me that sometimes getting to these meetings is very difficult. And it could be because the accessible taxi is not available, or it doesn't exist, or the bus is booked. And so I've been picking people up to be able to come to the meeting because there were people that were late getting to the meeting because of transportation. And I was thinking that as a minimum, that there should be some reimbursement of costs to individuals attending this meeting, so that not only do the individuals who attend can attend, but maybe we attract people who aren't even available to come and be part of this committee because they can't even afford a taxi to get here. That we could attract more individuals if it wasn't a financial barrier to be at this committee. And so I was talking to Dan way back in March about not only reimbursing for taxi or whatever the transportation cost is to get someone to the meeting, to make it easy for individuals to be part of the committee. But I'm also aware that there are individuals who participate in the Committee of Adjustments who get paid to be part of that committee, and they're community members. And I feel that in order to be part of this committee, individuals have to have certain expertise around AOTA, now building code and site plan review. And I know that I put in a ton of hours on site review, which was just, all volunteer time. And I just feel that if one committee of council has expertise and are seen to have value and get paid, that the individuals on this committee have to have certain skill sets to be part of this committee and should be valued just as much. So I was talking to Dan about being individuals having it, being paid enough to be able to get here for transportation wise, but also an honorarium, valuing their participation on this committee. So that's my spiel. My doctor may call back any second, and I'm sorry I have to take it and run out of the way. But I was putting it out there that I think there needs to be value to the individuals who join this committee.
Thank you for that, Lorraine. Thank you. Does anybody else have any comment about this? John, go ahead.
Yes, I definitely understand what Lorraine is saying, especially as it relates to getting committee members sitting on. I've sat on a number of different committees, and usually there's a per diem, et cetera. And that's not to suggest that, if you wanted to forego it, like myself, I wouldn't have an issue foregoing that per diem, because I think it's not everyone that's going to need a small amount of money just to, get by. And I think if we look at it in a manner that's equitable to those that need it, and not there for people that don't need it, then I could move forward in that direction. Thanks.
Thanks for that, John. Crystal did do some background searching for us on other committees and other areas and communities. And there are per diems for some of them, some don't have them. And we do have a draft motion if everybody thinks we want to put a motion and go to council with this. Everybody in favor of that? Well, okay, so I'll just read the motion and I'll need a mover and a seconder for it. Do we have one? So it's whereas committee is aware of other communities and municipalities that provide lay persons or lay members with the per diem. Whereas committee members are required to invest time preparing for and attending meetings, as well as legislatively completing site plan reviews. Therefore, it is recommended that committee request council to consider a per diem in their 2021 operating budget for laypersons of the Accessibility Committee. Does anybody have any comment on that? No? So have a mover and a seconder for it. Lorraine, mover, seconder, Kay. All in favor? Motion's carried. That will go to council at the next meeting and we'll discuss it there.
Chair
Go
Armour, I have a quick question. I know, does the person themselves has to book the accessible town bus, correct?
That's correct.
So like when Laurel was looking to, she was usually trying to book the bus to come to our meetings on Wednesday, but apparently there was a standing order that somebody else had already had it booked like pretty much every Wednesday at the same time. And so does it mean that there can be a priority, or do we work with the town and say this Wednesday in particular, we need it for such and such requirement, or is that overstepping our bounds, I guess, shall we say?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that's something I have to run by Director Hernan, who'd have to run it back by the company. I'm not sure what the regulations are or the rules for them right now. I know you have to pre-book the bus. So I think for her, it was more the time of her meetings, getting there in time and catching the bus to go back on time, I think. But we can definitely look into that for sure. I guess that we'll move on to general information, and that's 9.1 District Accessibility Advisory Committee. And I was wondering if Dion has a update for us at all.
Yes, so on October 19th, we will be meeting for our first virtual meeting as a district committee. I know Debbie had asked for a couple of updates as well. Now, when it comes to the Corridor 11 bus, and I know Crystal, I think, had sent out an email to most of us that had said they were looking for hopefully an accessible bus by October to be able to run that. I had tried to reach out for confirmation today and did not get that from the district. So I did reach out to a Hammond that I know and asked what their availability for an accessible bus is. And he did respond back that they had ordered an accessible bus as soon as they signed the contract with the district. But then, of course, with COVID happening, it didn't come right away. So they're expecting delivery at the end of next week, hopefully, for an accessible bus. In the meantime, they're adhering to the voluntary standard for intercity transportation. They will provide accessible transportation on that route with a 24-hour advance request. So at this point, they're going based on the request with 24 hours notice for the Corridor 11 bus. And hopefully they will get their accessible bus that Hammonds had ordered. Hopefully maybe by the end of next week is what Greg had let me know. With regard to the update for the, and I did send a copy to Crystal just this morning, I believe. The district does have it on its website. So both Deb and I did attend the session, and it was on February 20th. So we did have a session with regards to the update on the 5-year transportation needs assessment and growth and sustainability plan and the project that they're doing at the district level for that sort of urban, rural connectivity. Yeah, and then of course COVID happened in March, so we haven't been able to connect. So hopefully some of that will be brought forward. So, but with regards to that, it went out with they used community transportation grants and the Ontario gas tax funding programs to sort of finance this ability for the transportation consulting network to come in. And what they were looking at was sort of, there was 6 areas that they were asked to follow up on. One was individual transportation solutions. The other was an accessible rural transportation solution, provision from an east to west connectivity, expansion of the inter-community Corridor 11 bus, seamless transportation networks in Muskoka, and long-term growth and financial sustainability. So those were sort of the 6 key aspects that the consultants were asked to sort of delve into and take a look at. What they decided is it would be a 3-phase approach. So the first phase would be to review the existing transit service and the best practices that are in place. Number 2, or phase 2, was to identify the preferred transportation options for Muskoka. And then phase 3 would be to develop the transit ridership growth and sustainability plan. So now they did actually complete phase 1 and 2 of this. They did not get to phase 3. So that's sort of the next steps. So phase 1, they did review the existing plans. Phase 2, so I guess in phase 1, I can talk, some of the key themes were they needed stronger transit links beyond the District of Muskoka. They wanted rural transportation programs. If you remember, there used to be that MET program, the Muskoka Extended Transit. They wanted sort of a longer service route from that. Use of accessible vehicles to ensure accessibility across the transportation networks. Consideration should be given to Corridor 11 bus between Orillia and Barrie. Southwestern Muskoka residents, they wanted to connect to Midland and Orillia from Georgian Bay Township. So yeah, there were a number of things that sort of had come up through looking at what had been existing done. And then phase 2, I know both Debbie and myself attended this session on February 20th, in which they did bring forward some options that they were proposing based on what they had got from community engagement and feedback. So some of the options were around extending it up through Baysville and connecting from Huntsville through Baysville down to Bracebridge. And then another option, of course, connecting Bracebridge through Gravenhurst, and one out sort of towards Port Carling, Bala to Georgian Bay Township, and then an extension for those that live in Georgian Bay Township and a part of Muskoka, but the closest, of course, main city for them would be Midland. So an extension into the Midland area. One of the things they talked about to save a bit of money is that the Corridor 11 bus go down to Orillia, and then that's sort of where it ends. And then to connect at times to the Lynx bus that goes between Simcoe. And so there's already a Lynx bus that goes from Orillia down to Barrie. So do we need that extension of Corridor 11, or could we focus on maybe a few more routes between Huntsville to Orillia, that kind of thing? So those are sort of in the proposal stage. That's where they were at with community engagement. And then we haven't, of course, got to the next phase as to how they are going to develop the ridership growth and the sustainability plan at this point. But that's sort of where they were at. I can tell you there were a number of people at that February session that were from Huntsville area as well, and were hopeful that they thought originally it was going to be based on how we bring from the outer areas, say Highway 60, those types of areas into Huntsville itself, which this Muskoka plan really wasn't to address that. The idea is it needs to come back, as Deb said, here at our plan of how we are going to create opportunities for riders sort of locally in Huntsville to connect from the outlying areas into town. Any questions?
Thanks for that. One thing I'd like to see is focus more just on our own community to begin with, right? I think that's good, later on down the road, connecting with Orillia and Barrie, but that's a good report. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Councillor Schumacher? Not seeing any questions. Does anybody have anything for the good of the community they'd like to discuss? Nothing? All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the meeting.
I'm upset to hear we've canceled the Santa Claus parade. The Rotary did.
Yes, so am I. We could have our own parade. Social distancing, though. I have moved by John Gallagher, seconded by Kay Leslie. That is now recommended that we do adjourn at 3:18. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, everyone. It was great to get together finally and see each other. And I see we have our next meeting will be in October the 19th. I believe it's scheduled for right now. So we look